Good evening. You're watching the news at 7:30 on ATV. I'm Emily Sue.
And I'm Leung. Here's a look at tonight's top stories.
Cheng market reopens, but chicken prices remain the same despite extra supply.
Street blockades during Occupy protests blamed for Hong Kong's sliding down livability index.
And fears raised over claim of Chinese nationals passing through Malaysia to join Islamic State. Live chicken imports may resume before the Lunar New Year next month if mainland officials are able to ensure that birds crossing the border are healthy.
More locally raised chickens were sold today at the Cheung wholesale market when it reopened. But shoppers hoping that increased supplies would lead to lower prices were disappointed. ATV's Winner Wong reports.
The Cheung wholesale market reopened today, 3 weeks after it was shut, following the discovery of the H7 avian flu virus in a batch of mainland chickens. During the closure of the wholesale market, chickens raised locally were sent to an inspection center in Ta Koo Ling before being distributed to wet markets across the city. The site could only handle around 6,000 birds a day, triggering a rise in the price of chickens. Now that the Cheung market is up and running again, supply has increased. 17,000 local chickens were sent there today for checks and redistribution. But there's been no comfort for consumers. Vendors said the price remains the same at around $60 a catty. Fresh mainland chickens are still banned, and it's not known when imports can begin again.
We certainly hoped the mainland poultry supply could be resumed before the Lunar New Year. But I think there is more to be done for the mainland authorities to ensure the infection control measures before the resumption, so as to minimize the risk of introducing avian flu into Hong Kong.
According to Ko, imports can resume only a day or two after the mainland makes appropriate arrangements. Winner Wong, ETV News.
The Occupy protests last year have been blamed for Hong Kong sliding down in the index of the world's most livable cities.
The SAR fell 16 places to 33rd, and the index organizers aren't optimistic of a rebound this year. Last year's Occupy mass protests hogged international headlines for weeks, if not months. While many were impressed by the generally peaceful nature of the 79-day protest, the pro-democracy campaign did change perceptions about Hong Kong. According to consulting firm ECA International's latest Global Livability Index, the SAR dropped 16 places last year, from 17th to 33rd. The plunge was blamed squarely on the road blockades during the sit-ins.
We've seen considerable manifestation of social political tensions. Anti-government protests. So that had an indirect impact on the lifestyle of all Hong Kong residents, both local-born residents as well as the expatriate population here in Hong Kong.
Protest sites were cleared last month, but the city's political reform plans appear to have reached a dead end, with pan-Democrats vowing to vote down the government's electoral blueprint in June. That could trigger another wave of protests and could foil a rebound on the index.
Then we will unlikely see Hong Kong rise back up in those rankings throughout the course of the next 12 to 24 months.
Other Asian cities ahead of Hong Kong in the Livability Index include Singapore, ranked number 1, Australia's Adelaide and Sydney in joint second, while Osaka is 4th. 23 people were killed in fires across Hong Kong last year, almost double the number who died in 2013.
Firefighters were called out more than 36,000 times last year, and 90% of the time they met their response target. ATV's Alison Chan reports.
Fire Services Director Lai Man-hin told the media today that fires claimed 23 lives last year, compared with 12 deaths in 2013. The number of people injured was 295, down from 369 in the previous year. Firefighters were called out 36,335 times last year, a decrease of 1.2% from 2013. Around 90% of the cases were handled within the targeted response time. The fatalities included Principal Fireman Leung, who died from severe head injuries suffered in a gas explosion at a public housing estate in Shek Kip Mei in November. 8 other firefighters were injured, 5 of them critically. Lai said an internal investigation into the deadly blast will be released to the public. He also pledged to review firefighting equipment and ensure better protection for firefighters. Alison Cheng, ATV News.
The Beijing loyalist who triggered a controversy by calling for China's national security law to be imposed in Hong Kong says people should realize that the city has the constitutional duty to implement Article 23 of the Basic Law.
In defending the call, which has been shunned by the pro-establishment camp, Leung criticized the government for not having a timetable for its own national security law. Leung stirred up a storm earlier this week when he suggested that the mainland's national security law be implemented in Hong Kong through an annex in the Basic Law. Even the pro-establishment camp cast doubts about Leung's proposal to fill the gap before the SAR government enacts its own national security laws. Under Article 23 of the Basic Law, Hong Kong is required to introduce legislation to prohibit acts of treason, secession, sedition, and subversion against the central government, but there's no deadline. A National People's Congress delegate defended his controversial proposal today, saying he only came up with the idea because the SAR government doesn't even have a timetable for Article 23. He warned the government not to procrastinate indefinitely because it has the constitutional responsibility to enforce national security laws. While blaming the entire public for the delay, singled out Pen Democrats, saying they feel that Article 23 targets them specifically. But he said only those who want to endanger China or split the country should be scared. Speaking during a visit to Fuzhou in Fujian province, Chief Secretary Carrie Lam confirmed that the government has no plans to launch any studies or preparations on Article 23. Pro-establishment lawmaker Priscilla Leung and Jack Lee, a former editor of Hong Kong University student union magazine Undergrad, took to the airwaves this morning as they joined the debate. Lee said he's worried that the magazine and another student publication, which were both denounced by Chief Executive Leung Cheng for discussing Hong Kong independence, will be considered illegal under Article 23. Priscilla Leung warned against a rush to endorse national security laws. In response to Leung's proposal, the Communist Party mouthpiece Global Times questioned 6,000 people on the mainland and found that 97% of them support applying China's national security law in Hong Kong. The government had tried to introduce Article 23 in 2003, but after 500,000 protesters took to the streets, the bill was shelved. Environment Chief Wong Kam-seng says the public will benefit if a new agreement is reached soon with the city's 2 electricity suppliers.
Wong also says moves are underway to recycle up to 60% of used glass bottles. ATV's Arthur Okiola reports.
Only 5% of used bottles in Hong Kong are recycled, a rate considered low as the government battles to reduce the amount of waste in the city's landfills. But speaking on a radio show this morning, Environment Secretary Wong Kam-seng said plans are in the pipeline to increase the rate. The aim is to recycle as much as 60% of glass bottles for reuse in bricks and roads. The government, meanwhile, plans to consult the public in the first half of the year on regulating the electricity market, as the scheme of control agreements with the city's 2 power companies expire in 2018. Wong said there are a number of complex issues, but he hopes to reach consensus with the electric suppliers in the next 2 years after gauging public views. He stressed that affordability, stability, and environmental issues will be taken into account, and it would benefit society as a whole if an agreement is reached within the term of the current government. Arthur Okiola, ATV News.
A new security scare has emerged following reports that more than 300 Chinese nationals have passed through Malaysia to join the Islamic State militant group in Iraq and Syria.
Both Malaysia and China are taking the matter seriously amid fears of fresh terrorist attacks. Here's Arthur Okiola.
Malaysia's national news agency Bernama quoted Home Minister Ahmad Zahid Hamidi as saying more than 300 Chinese nationals had used the country as a transit point on their way to the Middle East. Their final destination was Iraq or Syria, where the extremist group Islamic State has seized large areas. Ahmad Zahid was given the information by the Chinese Vice Public Security Minister Meng Hongwei at a meeting in Kuala Lumpur. Both countries said they were concerned about the development and would try to tackle the problem jointly. The security scare follows a surge in violence in Xinjiang, where Muslim Uyghurs have accused Chinese authorities of trampling on their religious and cultural rights. In Tokyo, Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga insisted that his country would not cave into a threat by Islamic State to kill 2 Japanese hostages. The militants say the pair will die unless Tokyo pays a ransom of $200 million. Arthur Urquiola, ATV News.
Cuba and the U.S. have taken another step towards restoring ties that were cut off more than 50 years ago.
The two sides held senior-level talks in Havana with the emphasis on migration. ATV's Joyce Wu reports.
Immigration was high on the agenda in the highest-level meeting between Cuban and U.S. officials in 35 years. The talks in the Cuban capital Havana came a month after the two countries decided to work to restore ties that were scrapped more than 50 years ago.
We exchanged ideas on other aspects of safe migration, such as the return of Cuban excludable aliens, the Cuban Family Reunification Parole Program, and the monitoring of repatriated Cuban nationals.
Havana wants Washington to stop granting safe haven to Cubans who set foot on U.S. soil, a policy which Cuba says promotes human trafficking and encourages people to risk their lives by crossing the Florida Straits on flimsy vessels. Cuba is also pressing for an end to the 53-year-old economic embargo. The ban was introduced in an attempt to force the island in the U.S. backyard to abandon socialism. But U.S. President Barack Obama admitted last month that the embargo was a failure and launched efforts to normalize relations. Joyce Wu, ATV News.
Time now for sports with Cheng.
And easy wins for Australian Open favourites, Anne.
Indeed, Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams have reached round 3. The sweltering heat didn't stop them from winning in straight sets. Defending champion Stanislas Wawrinka also advanced in Melbourne.
It was business as usual for world number 1 Novak Djokovic as he stormed past Andrei Kuznetsov of Russia in the Australian Open.